It's strange how small things can change your whole life. That January morning, the decision was made to use a heavier rod. Choose to go to a remote backwater instead of the usual places. And of course, there was a mysterious rustling sound that led me off the beaten path. If it had not been for these little things, I would never have met him, the silver ghost of the forest, whose presence in my life led to events that became the most terrible trials of my life and left scars on my body and soul. Scars that will never fully heal. My name is Mike Donovan. 15 years ago, I abandoned the hustle and bustle of Vancouver for a quiet cabin on the shores of Wildwood Lake in the interior of British Columbia. There is no cellular communications, the internet, or neighbors, just century-old pine trees, crystal-clear lakes, and a sky so low in the winter that you can almost touch the northern lights. People often ask me why I choose this life. First I answered something about my love of nature and the joy of being alone. Now I just shrug. After my divorce from Carol and an injury that forced me to quit my job as an aid worker, this place became my sanctuary, my healing. My only regret is the distance this decision has created between me and my son, Tommy. Every summer he would come visit me for a month, and every winter I would count the days until he came for the Christmas holidays. But between those meetings, there was a void that nothing could fill. That winter was particularly harsh. For 3 weeks the temperature had been around 20 degrees below zero, the wind was biting, and yet the ice on the lake was strangely in no hurry to become solid. This is a problem for me. The best fishing is always on the opposite shore, which I get there by boat in summer, and in winter, directly through the ice. That morning I decided to take a chance. The bait was beginning to run out and Tommy would arrive on vacation in a week. I promised him real fishing, and I needed to be prepared. I took my drill, gear, and backpack with the necessary things and set out across the lake. I remember the sunlight barely breaking through the thick clouds, casting strange blue shadows on the ice. Frost stung my cheeks and my breath came in silver clouds of steam. I was about halfway there when I heard a sound. Any experienced northerner would clearly recognize it as a quiet crack. Instinctively feeling the chill, I stared at the ice beneath my feet. Every time you exhale, a thin crack spreads to the sides. I muttered carefully, shifting my weight from one leg to the other. It was too late to retreat. Ahead, just 100 meters away, there appeared a reliable strip of ice, which I could distinguish by its darker blue color. Slowly, I stretched out my arms for balance and began to walk forward. 10 steps, 20 steps, 30 steps. The ice continued to crack, but it held. When there was less than 30 meters left to the safe zone, I saw a black dot in front of me. At first I thought it was just a shadow in the clouds, but then I made out the outline, a hole, and a pretty big one at that. I cursed through my teeth. Now you have to move around, risking failure with every step. I was about to turn right, when something in this hole caught my attention. Some sports are too weak for wind or water currents. Squinting my eyes, I saw something that made me forget my own safety. In the hole, clinging to the edge of the ice, there was an enormous animal. That's a wolf. The silver-gray fur clung to the body and looked unusually thin in the icy water. The muzzle was tilted back and the eyes were closed. But most importantly, his front paws were still gripping the edge of the ice, which meant he was still alive and still fighting. I don't know what happened to me. Perhaps the reflexes of the previous rescuer kicked in, or maybe he just couldn't stand watching a living thing slowly sink beneath the ice. Taking a rope from the backpack I had been carrying, a northern custom, I began to carefully approach the ice hole, lying flat on the ice and distributing my weight evenly. "Hold on, man," I whispered, even though I knew the wolf couldn't hear me. "I'm close." Once I was within casting distance, I made a loop around the end of the rope. It must be thrown at the wolf's face or neck to pull it out, not too close to the edge of the hole. The first throw was unsuccessful, The coils slipped off the wet wool. On the second lucky occasion, I carefully tightened the noose and began to slowly pull the wolf out of the death trap, centimeter by centimeter. The ice cracks are getting bigger and bigger. At one point, I was sure we would both end up in the water, but I stubbornly kept pulling. As the wolf's body fell forward onto the ice, it twitched faintly, a sign of life that gave me strength. After a few more minutes of agonizing tension, the wolf was completely frozen. He was unconscious, but breathing. I saw his chest rise and fall faintly. Now the most difficult task lies ahead, getting him ashore. Leaving the wolf here meant he was doomed to die of hypothermia. But hauling something this heavy across thin ice was just crazy. I decided to compromise. I built a makeshift sled out of my jacket, put the wolf on it, and began to move slowly towards the shore, choosing the safest path. I don't know how long it took. Maybe an hour, maybe 2. The sun had already set, and, wet, cold, but strangely content, I dragged my unusual burden into the cabin. Only, inside, in the warm light of the kerosene lamps, could I really see the rescued animals. It was a large male, no longer young, but not yet old. With the ice removed, his fur was an unusual silver-gray color, almost white at the nape, unusual in our area, where wolves are usually darker in color. But what struck me most were his eyes, which opened for a moment as I laid him by the fire, light amber, almost golden, speckled with black, like the starry sky on a winter night. "What should I do to you, man?" I muttered while wiping his body with a towel. "You realize we're not in a zoo here, right?" It was funny, but it didn't even occur to me that I could simply take a half-dead predator back into the forest. It's like pulling a person out of an ice cave and then throwing him out in a snowstorm. That night I placed it in a corner away from the stove so that the heat would not harm it. He had cut the hair around a small wound on his side, which he had noticed during his inspection. It looked like he had fallen into the wormwood for some reason, but while running away from something or someone. I cleaned the wound with disinfectant and put a bandage on it. The wolf remained in a strange semi-comatose state. He did not resist, but he did not appear completely helpless either. "Listen," I told him as I put the bandage on, "as soon as you feel better, you have to go back to the forest. I can't keep a wolf in my house, especially when my son is coming." The wolf didn't answer, of course, but I felt a glimmer of understanding in his eyes. A few hours later, he accepted the water from my hand and ate the boiled meat I handed him. Then he closed his eyes and seemed to fall asleep. I sat down in the chair opposite, afraid to leave him unattended. The hand kept reaching for the gun hanging above the door, a purely instinctive reaction to the approach of a predator. But at the same time, looking at the sleeping wolf, I felt a strange sense of peace. There was something about him that was not only animalistic but almost sensible. I can't find the right words. I just remember thinking that one day I would tell Tommy this incredible story. Unless, of course, my guest had already returned to the forest by the time he arrived. The wolf stayed in my cabin for 3 days. During this time, he grew stronger, his wounds began to heal, and his appetite became like that of a healthy animal. I knew I had to get him out as soon as possible. It was too dangerous to keep a wild predator in the house. Besides, the time for Tommy to arrive was almost here. On the 4th morning, I awoke to find this unusual visitor sitting at my door, staring intently at me with his golden eyes. I knew without words he was leaving. "Your bag is gone, isn't it?" I asked, opening the door. "Can you find your way home?" The wolf slowly walked up to the porch, stopped, looked back at me, as if saying goodbye, and then trotted off toward the forest. At the edge of the forest he paused, turned, and let out a short, almost melodious howl, not threatening, but somehow almost grateful. Then he disappeared forever into the woods. I stood on the porch long after his silvery figure had disappeared among the shadows of the pines. It's strange, but I have a sad feeling. These days I have gotten used to his presence, to the sound of his quiet breathing in the corner of the room, and to his attentive care. Eyes watching my every move. Ghost. I suddenly said loudly. Ghost. The name came naturally, looking at the silver fur that made him almost invisible in the winter forest. 3 days later Tommy arrived and life returned to normal. We fished, I taught him to read animal tracks, and we played chess by the fire in the evenings. But I kept listening to the sounds outside and looking out the window furtively, as if expecting to see a familiar figure there. "Dad, you're a little weird," Tommy said on the 5th day. "You have been looking out the window. Are you waiting for someone?" I smiled and ruffled his hair. "No, just follow the old habits. Being alert in the forest means staying alive." That night I told him the story of how I rescued the wolf from the sagebrush. Tommy's eyes sparkled with joy. "Do you really have a real wild wolf in your cabin?" he asked incredulously. "Didn't he try to eat you?" "No, he's different," I replied, searching for the right words. It was like he understood that I was trying to help. "Will he come back?" Tommy asked hopefully. "I'd like to see him." "Hardly," I shrugged. "Wild animals generally avoid humans." "That's right." I had no idea then what nightmare was waiting for us. A few days later, Tommy and I returned from a fishing trip and noticed strange footprints around the cabin. Unmistakable wolf prints. A day later, as I was chopping wood and Tommy was gathering sawdust, a silvery shadow flashed at the edge of the forest and froze us both. "Dad," Tommy whispered. "That's him, isn't it? Your wolf." "Probably," I answered just as calmly, without taking my eyes off the forest. "Only he doesn't belong to me. He's on his own." The wolf stood at the edge of the forest, half hidden in the shadows of the pine trees, but I recognized it by its silvery fur and its proud posture. He didn't come closer, just watched, and there was no aggression in his posture. "Can I come closer?" Tommy asked, pulling on my sleeve. "No," I responded firmly. "Even if he remembers me, he's still a wild animal. He needs his space." Tommy reluctantly agreed, but from that day on, the first thing he did every morning was to run to the window to see if the wolf had returned. To his delight, the phantom, as I called him in my mind, began to appear more and more frequently. Sometimes we noticed him at the edge of the forest, sometimes we saw only traces left around the cabin. One morning we found a vole on our porch, a gift, no doubt. Tommy was delighted by these visits, and I was a little apprehensive but secretly delighted. About a week later, I had an encounter that made me see our strange connection to wolves in a different light. National Park Ranger Rick Hansen came by to see how I was coping with the harsh winter. Rick is a nice guy, but he has conservative views on wildlife. "I found a big silver wolf in your area," he said, warming his hands on a cup of coffee. "A strange beast. It's too close to human habitation. It could be dangerous." I tensed. "You're not going to hunt him down, are you?" Rick shrugged. "If he's a threat, he'll have to. The hunters in the village across the lake have complained. They say he's spying on them." "This wolf isn't a threat to anyone," I objected. "He's just curious." The hunter looked at me puzzled. "Do you know him, Mike?" I hesitated, unsure whether to tell the story of redemption. Finally, I decided the truth could only help. "I pulled him out of the hole a few weeks ago," I admitted. "He was close to death, and I kept him with me for 3 days until he got stronger. After that, he sometimes appeared nearby, but he didn't show any aggression." Rick whistled. "Damn it, Mike. You brought a wild wolf into the house? Are you crazy? What if he attacks you at night?" "He won't attack," I said firmly. "He had his chance, and he chose to go in peace. Rick, I know this sounds strange, but this wolf is different. It's like he's grateful. Wolves don't know how to be grateful, the hunter snapped. These are wild animals. How do you explain that he brings us prey and never shows aggression? Tommy, who had been listening to the conversation silently, interrupted. Rick just shook his head. Listen, Mike, I appreciate your concern for wildlife. But for your safety, and especially for the boy's safety, please stay away from this wolf. Do not feed or tempt him. Let him live in the forest, where he belongs. After the hunter left, Tommy and I sat in silence for a long time. From a common-sense standpoint, I understood that Rick was right. But something deep inside resisted the idea that the ghosts could be just wild animals guided by instinct. Dad, Tommy broke the silence. You're not going to let the hunters kill our wolves, are you? I sighed heavily. He's not ours, Tommy. I can't stop the hunter from doing his job. But phantoms are no threat to anyone. This is not fair. I looked at my son, amazed at the intensity of his emotion. Over the course of the day, he had developed an attachment to this wolf, someone he had only seen a handful of times. And who could I blame him? I myself had developed a strange connection to this silver ghost of the forest. Listen, I said, placing my hand on my son's shoulder. I'll talk to Rick again. Please give us time. If the wolf didn't cause trouble, maybe they wouldn't bother him. The next morning we were awakened by a strange sound, a soft scratching on the door. Automatically I reached for my gun, but Tommy was already at the window. Dad, it's a ghost, he shouted. He's right at the door. I couldn't believe my eyes and hurried over to him. Indeed, our silver wolf was sitting on the porch, calmly and almost homely. When he noticed us at the window, he stood up and took a few steps back, as if inviting us to follow him. Tommy said confidently. How do you know? I asked. I just know, my son shrugged. Can we go out? The one hand, he's a wild predator, and on the other, he never behaves aggressively. I can't shake the feeling that he really wants to show us something. Okay, I said finally, but stay close to me. Don't make sudden movements. We dressed and walked out onto the porch. The ghost waited for us at a safe distance, watching carefully. As we stepped off the porch, he turned and walked slowly toward the forest, looking back to see if we were following him. See that? I told you so, Tommy whispered triumphantly. We followed the wolf for about 15 minutes. He led us along an almost inconspicuous path, occasionally stopping so that we could catch up with him. Finally we came to a small clearing, surrounded by tall pine trees. The wolf stopped and turned towards us, as if expecting something. Why did he bring us here? Tommy asked, looking around. There's nothing here. I didn't understand either, until I noticed a strange accumulation. It was snowing, and I was surprised to find it was some kind of study or study room. Look, Father. Wow. Tommy sighed. He has a family. He showed us his family. The ghost stood aside, showing no concern, as if trusting us completely. It was incredible. A wild wolf led us to his den and his pups. I've never heard of a wolf behaving like this. He's proud of them, I said, unable to find any other explanation. I wanted us to know why he came to us. He was protecting the territory where his kits were growing up. We didn't stay long, so as not to disturb the pups. On the way back, I thought about what to tell Rick. Now I understand why the ghost is so attached to this territory, and why he is spying on the hunters. And judging by the absence of wolves near the pups, he is most likely acting alone. That day, I went to Rick and told him everything except the location of the nest. I saw the confusion on his face, but eventually he agreed to give the wolf a chance. But if there are complaints of assault, Mike, I won't be able to turn a blind eye, he warned. I nodded, realizing that this was the best I could hope for right now. The following days passed peacefully. The ghost appears every morning, as if to check if everything is all right, and then disappears into the forest. Tommy even started leaving food for him, leftovers from our dinners or fish we caught. To my surprise, the wolves accepted the offerings, even though I tried to explain to my son that wild animals should not be fed. Trouble comes from unexpected places. One day I decided to show Tommy a beautiful spot a few kilometers from the cabin, a small waterfall that, in the winter, is transformed into a fantastic ice sculpture. We set out early in the morning, carrying food, warm clothes, and a flare gun just in case. The weather was perfect this day, sunny, windless, with a slight frost. Tommy enjoyed the hike. I taught him to read footprints in the snow, and the views from the high cliffs were incredible. We had a picnic by the waterfall and admired the play of light and shadow in the icicles. "Look, Dad," Tommy said suddenly, pointing to something on the other side of the river. "There's someone there." I squinted my eyes and looked in the direction indicated, a chill running up my spine. On the hillside, hidden by the bushes, stood a huge black bear. Bear encounters in the winter are rare in our area. They usually sleep in their dens until spring, but sometimes hunger or some kind of anxiety forces them to leave the shelter early. Such winter bears are particularly dangerous, hungry, irritable, and aggressive. "Don't move," I whispered to Tommy. "Slowly hand me the flare gun in the backpack." But it was too late. The bear noticed us and began sniffing toward the river. He had a thin face, his fur hung in clumps at his sides, and there was an unhealthy gleam in his eyes. I broke out in a cold sweat. This could have been the worst possible scenario. "Tommy," I said as calmly as I could, "start backing slowly back toward the trail when I tell you to. Don't run, don't scream, just back away slowly." The bear was already on our shore, about 50 meters away. He stood up on his hind legs, sniffing, and I realized with horror that the smell of our food had caught his attention. "Now," I ordered, pulling out the flare gun. "Move away slowly." Tommy began to back away, but just then, his feet slipped from the cold stone. He fell down and suddenly cried out in pain. The bear responded immediately to the sound and movement. It got on all fours and came toward us, staggering and wobbling but with frightening speed. "Hold on," I yelled to Tommy, raising my flare gun. There was a loud bang, and a bright red rocket shot into the sky. This would usually be enough to scare off any wildlife. But this bear was too hungry and too crazy. He only froze for a moment, then continued to move closer, now growling. I frantically reloaded, realizing we only had seconds left. "Tommy, for me," I ordered, trying to protect my son with my gun. There was another red flash from my body, but then, as if it was angry, it gave a deafening roar, and Tommy and I had no time to reload, and my hands habitually groped for the knife in my pocket. The defense of 300 kilograms of muscle and claws was pitiful, but it was the only thing I had, and when the distance between us was reduced to a few meters, I found that running was useless. In a few seconds, the bear would catch up with us. The only chance was to make as much noise as possible, trying to scare him. I grabbed a nearby branch and started to beat the trunk, while screaming loudly. Tommy immediately understood my strategy and joined in, hitting the stone with a metal cup. For a moment, our plan seemed to succeed. The bear stopped, obviously confused by the sudden noise. But then, as if in a nightmare, he came towards us again, speeding up his pace. I realized that we had lost. The only thing I could do was to distract the beast with me and buy some time for Tommy. "Run over to that big cedar tree and climb up it," I whispered to my son. "I'll distract him." "No, Dad." Tommy's eyes were full of fear. Do as I say, I shouted, coming forward and waving a branch. Hey, Clubfoot, I'm here. Come over. The bear actually turned its attention to me, and I began to slowly walk away, taking him away from Tommy. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my son limp to a tree and start to climb up. At least he would be safe. And, well, I would do my best. I don't know how long this standoff lasted. Maybe a minute, maybe 5. I backed away, swinging the branch, keeping as much distance as possible from the bear. The beast followed me, sometimes speeding up, sometimes slowing down, as if teasing its prey. I heard Tommy screaming somewhere in the distance, but I couldn't be distracted. At some point, the bear obviously got tired of this game. He accelerated sharply, closing the distance between us. I threw away the branch. It was no longer an obstacle, and took out a knife, knowing that this was my last line of defense. The bear was already close to me. I could feel its hot, smelly breath, see the yellow fangs in its exposed mouth. A few more moments, and he would be rushing at me. At that moment, the expected thing happened. A shadow like silver lightning darted out from behind the tree and crashed into the bear's side. Ghost. The majestic silver wolf grabbed the bear's neck and roared in anger. The beast roared in pain and surprise and tried to throw off its attacker. But the wolf held on and bit him with its sharp fangs. I stood there, numb with shock, unable to believe my eyes. Was incredible. A wolf single-handedly attacked a bear many times his size. But even more incredible was that the phantom seemed to do this to protect us. Bear and wolf spun in a deadly dance. One tried to close in on its foe with its powerful claws. The other dodged and attacked again, aiming for the throat and eyes. Blood dyed the snow scarlet. I knew the result was inevitable. The phantom could not resist such an opponent for long. As if in response to my thoughts, 3 more silver shadows appeared in the forest, wolves from the ghost pack, coming to the aid of their leader. Now the bear was surrounded and besieged on all sides. Even such a powerful beast could not withstand the coordinated actions of the wolves. In a matter of minutes, it was all over. The wounded, bloody bear limped away into the forest, pursued by 2 wolves. Ghost and the other wolf stayed behind, watching him retreat breathlessly. Only when he was sure the danger was over did the phantom turn to us. Dad, how are you? Tommy had climbed down from the tree and was limping toward me. Yeah, everything's fine, I responded, not taking my eyes off the wolf. Thank you, our friend. The ghost stood a few meters away from us, breathing heavily, with bloody fur on his sides, marks left by the bear's claws. In his golden eyes, I saw things I had never thought to see in a wild animal: awareness, determination, and, yes, maybe nobility. Thank you, I whispered, knowing he couldn't understand the words but hoping. My tone conveyed how I felt. The wolves lowered their heads slightly, as if in acknowledgement, then slowly turned and walked into the forest. Soon they disappeared into the woods. Tommy asked as we approached the cabin. I don't know, I answered honestly. We didn't sleep that night. They lit all the lights, threw some wood in the stove, and I treated Tommy's injured leg, and thank all the gods it ended with nothing but scars and bruises. Why do you think he did that, Dad? Tommy asked as we sat by the fire. Why would Phantom risk his life for us? I guess it might be an expression of gratitude. I answered slowly, searching for the right words. I saved his life and he's returning the favor. But it's more than just a debt. Maybe he feels like we're friends? We're part of his territory, family in a way. Do you think he can survive? He's injured. Wolves are strong animals, I said, even though I was worried. And he's got a pack to take care of him. Next morning we found fresh wolf tracks on our porch. Ghosts come at night to check if we are okay. This thought makes me laugh. A week passed. It's time for Tommy to go home. Winter break is over. He packed his things and I drove him into town, to the bus station. All the way he talked about ghosts, about ghosts, about ghosts. Wolf cubs, about how he told this incredible story to his mother and friends, and when we said goodbye at the station, he sighed. Whether they believe it or not, and I smiled and hugged him. You know the truth. The first thing I did when I got back to the cabin was to follow the familiar path to the wolf pack's den. I didn't go any closer, I just wanted to make sure the ghost was okay. To my relief, I noticed a familiar silver silhouette on the hillside, a wolf, observing its surroundings and guarding its territory. When our eyes met, it raised its head and gave a short, whining hello. I raised my hand in response. Since then, time has passed. Over the years, he's gone from college to studying wildlife, and his encounters with ghosts it's no coincidence that ghosts stay at his cabin on Wildwood Lake. Although I don't encounter ghosts very often, checking if I have everything. He sat at the edge of the forest, watching with his wise golden eyes, and then disappeared into the trees, the ghost of the northern forest that once saved our lives. I never tell this story to random people. Most people would think I was a crazy old man who had lived alone in the woods for too long. But sometimes, when Tommy and his family came to visit, we would sit around the fire in the evenings and I would tell this story to his children. When we heard the distant howling of wolves in the forest, we all fell silent and listened. Because we know that, among these sounds, there is a special sound. A friend's voice tells us that sometimes the line between people and wildlife is thinner than it seems. Kindness, responsibility, and friendship are understood by all living beings, no matter what language they speak. It's strange how small things can change your whole life. Decided to help the wolf who fell into the water. Choose to trust the beast. In a tiny moment between life and death, a silver shadow leaps out of the forest to protect those it considers its own. All of these little things add up to a story that I will remember for the rest of my life. The story of a wolf named Ghost who became not only a rescued animal, but a true friend.